Thank you, Ambassador. Bold words we shall overcome. Anyway, this was a very passionate expose of the Ukrainian position in contemporary times. You spoke with not just with passion, but with also with logic. I mean, there's a saying in French: "Le cœur a la raison que la raison ne connaît pas." The heart has its reasons, which even reason will not understand. But as I said, you spoke with logic, and as you concluded, you juxtaposed the situation in other parts of the world, not just Asia, but also Asia, the behavior pattern of a small and big neighbor. We like to believe that there are ways and ways in which a smaller neighbor can behave. One is what we call the pilot fish behavior. You tack close to the shark in order not to be eaten. The other is you sort of develop your capabilities to the extent that you want to give the potential attacker a bloody nose if he should attack. And the third is, as you say, the prevalence of a rule of law, the most preferred option of all, which will avoid the kind of catastrophe that you mentioned, another war. So thank you very much for those remarks, and now I'll open the floor to questions, remarks, comments from the floor. The floor is open. Yes, Mr. Jumabai.
Ambassador, first of all, like the most important is we'd like to give you our condolences on what is happening in Ukraine and the inhumanity that has been imposed or said to be imposed on the Ukrainian people. So I'd like to ask, since Ukraine is part of NATO, am I right? Part of the European Union?
We are neither member of NATO nor the European Union. Just recently, months ago, the associated agreement with the EU was concluded, and well,
Right.
just that's it.
No, but what I meant was, since if it is so, then the EU has also the physical and the power to intervene in protecting Ukraine. Will it do so? Does it have the incentive to do so, or the responsibility to do so, since you're part of the European Union? And the second is Crimea permanently acceptable to Ukraine as part of Russia, or is that a dispute? You dispute that too. So I'd like really to have a feeling, but most of all, my sympathies to what is happening. This is just inhuman. It has happened in many other countries in Asia too, but nevertheless, it is inhuman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jumabai. Ambassador, would you like to react?
I'm sincerely thankful for your passionate words. Ukrainians are thankful nation, really thankful nation. We cherish, we remember, and we will respond adequately to those who are friendly with us, and vice versa, of course. We are not EU member states. It was the crucial point of the people in Ukraine who rioted against the former regime imposed by President Yanukovych, who escaped illegally from Ukrainian territory. It was an idea which went through generations to resume our position in the European Union, in Europe, in European family, and in particular to join EU for years. In my former capacity in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was director of the Department for European Union for 2 years, 2000-2002. And we moved in that direction, but too slowly. Too slowly. Now, when it comes to the conclusion of, when it came to the conclusion of the associative agreement, and it was clear for Moscow that this is a crucial point, and afterwards, if it is concluded, so Ukraine would have legal obligations before EU. Mr. Yanukovych was offered $15 billion credit. He even managed to receive one. No, 2 point something billion US dollar. We don't know where are they. Where did it sunk money? Maybe together with him in Rostov-on-Don in Russia. All this, Yanukovych and his proxies, all of them enjoy life in Russia, and some of them in Israel, maybe, some other countries. But lion part of them escaped on Russian territory. So, of course, naturally, we expect and we rely on support of the European Union, and we receive such support. And sanctions introduced against Russia because of Russian aggression against Ukraine, we appreciate very much. We expect even stronger and more comprehensive sanctions. Painful for Europeans, painful for us, but inevitably Russia deserves such attitude. And finally, Crimea. If you look back in the history, until the beginning of 18th century, Moscow paid tribute to Crimean Khaganate, to Crimean state. The humiliation, which is still preserved mentally by Kremlin rulers, is still haunting them. Nevertheless, the territory until it was 1956, when, according to then existing, valid legislature, Crimea has become a part of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. It was totally one of the poorest and one of the most backward part of the European part of the Soviet Union, because of many reasons. Firstly, as Singaporeans present here, you understand, lack of fresh water. 80% of fresh water comes from the continent, from Ukraine. The Dnieper, one of the biggest rivers in Europe, third biggest, was channeled, big part of it, to Crimea. 90-something% of electricity nowadays come from the continental Ukraine to the peninsula. It is vitally dependent on this communication, on these links. The problem with Crimea was, it was a haven for retired Communist Party functionaries, retired army officers. At that time, they had a privilege to live after retirement where they would like to. And most of them had this option to go to Eastern Siberia or to Crimea. Regardless of what you're seeing, I assure you, the option was Crimea. So these people did not contribute; they just consumed.
Okay. Yes. Okay. You first, Mr. Suryanarayana, then.
Suryanarayan from ISAS here. I mean, from what you said, of course, I came a little late because we had some other functions, so I didn't know whether you had said this particular aspect earlier. From what you have said, it appears that China and India are soft towards Russia on this issue, mainly because Russia thinks Asia is on the rise. But does it make any sense at all? And also, why is it that the US does not intervene the way it did in the case of Saddam Hussein's annexation of Kuwait? In the case of Saddam Hussein's annexation of Kuwait, the US took the lead, to liberate Kuwait from Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Why is it that the US doesn't do anything now? There must be some reason for that. And also, why is it that China and India appear to be soft towards Russia? What is your take? Of course, I may be knowing something about what they think, but I would like to know your point of view. Thank you.
Mm. So I stress my point of view. Yeah? Well, firstly, the war is waged on our soil. And Ukraine is a democratic country. And we cherish human life. And global, internationally accepted values. Only dictatorships neglect human being, can commit atrocities. For normal people, it is absurd to think about waging war on its own territory or elsewhere. Anywhere. There is a best instrument for diplomats, round table. But not with terrorists. I think you agree with me. So, United States interference like in Kuwait, etc. We are thankful to the administration of the United States to extend the hands of help under the present circumstances. There is no a single American soldier on the front line, but there are thousands of Russian soldiers on the front line. I cannot imagine, you ask me personally, I cannot imagine thousands of American soldiers on Ukrainian soil fighting with a foreign army. It is disaster for us. We insist that negotiations which were launched in some way in Minsk in this September could be a reasonable platform to start solving problems. But in any case, we don't mean that such negotiations are affordable with terrorists armed and funded by a foreign state.
Okay, also, yeah, I'll give it the floor in a moment. Also the fact, I mean, the reason why Americans didn't intervene in Ukraine like they did in Iraq was the fact that the perceived adversary in this case, which would be Russia, is also a nuclear power, obviously. So this is a very obvious thing. I mean, the way to get out of possibilities of American intervention is probably to nuclearize yourself, which Libya unfortunately did not learn enough in time. Yes, please. Yeah, you could go after.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dmitry Lyukhovsky. I'm from Embassy of Russia here in Singapore. My mother is Ukrainian, my father is Russian, 50-50. I came here in personal capacity. I learned about this event by chance and I volunteered. It can be because it's interesting for me. I cannot divide in my heart, in my soul, in my mind, Russia and Ukraine. It's one country, one people for me. My grandparents from Ukraine. I would like to say the following thing. There are a lot of accusations toward Russia. Why don't invite a Russian ambassador? Because here Ukrainian perspective was offered. If you want to address an issue, serious crisis, why don't you hear the second part? There is a good Latin, proverb in Latin, audiatur et altera pars. Let's hear to the other side, because this perspective was entirely Ukrainian. I'm not going to argue, to dispute, because it will take another 1 hour and a half. I have 2 questions to His Excellency, one from myself and one from my neighbor, who is ethnic Ukrainian, living in Russia from Western Ukraine, from the city of Ivano-Frankivsk. She comes to Russia as a guest worker. She lives in Ukraine, comes to Russia, and she would like to ask a question to Ukrainian government, but it's very difficult. Her question is, I talked to her yesterday. Her question is, there was an idea aired in Ukraine about 2 years ago of a referendum. Given a referendum regarding all Ukrainians to ask a question, which way to go, east or west? Because there is a divide, certain divide. It's evident to every political expert in Ukraine. Some people tend towards the Eurasian Union, some people tend towards the European Union. Why not holding a referendum? Why waging war in eastern Ukraine, which eventually may end up not in the European Union, but as the European Somalia? And the second question I would like to ask is regarding Crimea. There was a referendum. 97% of people voted to secede from Ukraine. They refer to the Article 1 of UN Charter, which has the right to self-determination. Today I read Act of Independence of Ukraine, dated August 24th, 1991, which refers exactly to the same provision, and which says, given the Article 1 of UN Charter, given the right to self-determination, Ukraine would like to secede from Soviet Union under the threat of the attempted coup in Moscow. Crimea said the same. There was a coup from their point of view in Ukraine. Illegal, unconstitutional government seized power, threatened that they decided to hold a referendum with autonomy and seceded. So I have just a question. Why you deny Crimea the right which you actually used 23 years ago? And why don't you decide this issue of East and West divide in Ukraine via referendum and instead you're using blatant force? In July I was in Russia on leave, and my native town, Orenburg, they were brought a few thousand Ukrainian refugees by air from eastern Ukraine. I went to talk to them. I can repeat only their words. They said there is civil war in East Ukraine. Ukrainian army is killing people in Eastern Ukraine. I repeat the words of people who brought from Donetsk and Lugansk region, only because we want to talk Russian, and we want to have close relations with Russia. I think it's better to establish a dialogue with them instead of waging civil war against them. That's my personal opinion, not as a government official. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I give the floor to the ambassador, my understanding is that a general invitation is given to all ambassadors.
No, we didn't receive anything.
Didn't you?
No.
Okay. It's all right. In any case, the idea of these events are to do exactly what you have done, for you to come in this capacity and contend the views presented, but not necessarily to juxtapose one set of views with another. Otherwise, every time we have India, we have to have Pakistan, and you know, the whole thing will become deliberation in international relations, and that is not the.
So many accusations.
But you did a very fine job, I think, presenting a contrarian view to which the ambassador is now given the floor to respond.
Thank you. Thank you, colleague from Russian Embassy. It's not a surprise that you are 50-50 Russian-Ukrainian. It's a very usual case. It was Soviet time when I studied at Moscow University, and I was suggested occupation in very good occupation in Moscow, in the what do you call it? Friendship Society, yeah? You know, the place. And I was suggested to buy a document that I am registered somewhere not far from Moscow. I thought over the possibility to stay in Moscow, to make a career over there, and then realized, shall I start my career from false documents? And thus I left for my native city, Kyiv. and have a different life. I think many of those who has this question, sometimes living in Russia and to live for Ukraine, they could realize their intentions. But well, coming to your question, referendum in Ukraine. I understand that you ask the question to the former government and former president. And according to the unbeatable figures, it was not in favor of so-called Eurasian Union. It was not in favor of Russian language as a state language, second state language. Let me tell you a short story. 4 years ago, Lee Kuan Yew visited Ukraine. And I was present at the conversation between him and former Prime Minister Mr. Azarov, who failed to learn Ukrainian, although he spent most of his life in Ukraine. So, former Prime Minister raised the question of second state language before LKY, and Mr. Lee. And you may recognize in this answer, I was just staying next to these people. He said, "Oh, stop. I am not an expert in your languages. Ukrainian, Russian, I don't know. What I know for sure, the second language in your country must be English. I do not advertise English, it is advertised very well around the world. We in Ukraine, we don't have a lack of access to Russian education. But for statehoodness, for the goals of statehoodness, Ukrainian language must be the only one. This is said by me, who was born in a Russian-speaking family, who graduated from Moscow University, and who shifted from Russian to Ukrainian 20 years ago. And I told already that my wife at home, she speaks Russian, and nobody prohibits her, including me. Then your next question.
Crimea.
Sorry, but gun-pointed farce or this puppet ceremony, just pieces of paper printed on the copy machine, and whoever could participate this farce anywhere. How do you think one can comment such things seriously? And there is a Ukrainian legislature which is not erased from our realities. So your country is a federal country. You have many entities, but nobody recognizes your country as a federal one. The vertical of power is so strict, is so unshakable. So I don't think there is much space to speak about the so-called Crimean referendum. Sorry, it's beyond comments.
Okay, you first.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Danish Sultan. They say that we can choose our friends, but we can't choose our neighbors. And unfortunately, the social circle within this world, we move more with our friends than we move with our neighbors or interact with our neighbors. And we have seen this coming from Pakistan, the first invasion of Afghanistan, which was Russian, and they were defeated. Soviet Union, sorry, okay. Or the
thousands of Ukrainians.
Yeah. Right, and the second invasion of Afghanistan as well. which definitely left the country totally destroyed. And
Is the American one you're talking
the American one, of course. And then they are also going back without really finding a proper solution. And I the comment you said that having foreign troops in your country would be a total disaster, and that's what happened in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, what you have spoken about Ukraine, it has so many things going around it. There was a question about American interference. How can they uphold international law when they themselves in 2004, without a UN resolution, went into Iraq and found a coalition of the willing? And that terminology, coalition of the willing, is being used again and again. Coming to Ukraine.
So it was a question about Americans.
No, this is just a comment on what's actually happened and why we are in such a situation. Because if rule of law was upheld, perhaps we could go to the UN and solve these problems, like you said, that we could sit around the round table. Ukraine's acceptance to the EU, or talks for the EU, I'd like to comment on that. We saw that Turkey was denied. And in a time of financial crisis, when the EU should be basically kind of consolidating its current position, why would the EU go out and get another member into the EU? Outside view is that it is more political than really economical. Your comment on that? Thank you.
Okay.
Well, just a question on EU. Yes?
Yes.
In fact, I mentioned already that in my former capacity in the capital, I worked as the director of the Department of the European Union. And for me, it was always quite difficult to acknowledge that Ukraine is eager to become a EU member.
Difficult to acknowledge.
Why? I can explain, and I think it is very easy to shape. Norms and values. The model of behavior, the rule of law, the independence of justice. This is really meaningful. Membership. For membership, it is something secondary. Well, it does not meet the guideline of our leadership, of my leadership, because the goal is to apply for EU membership by 2020. Maybe something will change within these 5-6 years. But what is fundamental for me, and I understand that this our gathering is just not for media people. This is just for us, for friends. And look, Ukrainian justice is is recognized until today as one of the most corrupted in Europe. We cannot move forward without fundamental reform of judicial system. A year ago, there was a delegation from Ukrainian High Court in Singapore, and they visited the High Court of Singapore and asked the question on how you managed to be so much appreciated and valued by Singaporeans. The answer was brilliant. Because of zero tolerance towards corruption. This is what really meaningful to my mind, to my country.
Okay. We have time for 3 quick. Okay, we'll take all the 3 together. All right, you all as well. We'll take 3 together. You, her, and you, Mr. Doshi, and then Ambassador will respond, and we will wrap it up. Yes.
So, speaking on the point that
bring it closer to your...
about the political cleavage between East and West Ukraine, and we saw it in the 2010 election when on the Ukraine net you can see quite clearly that in the electoral districts that the west of Ukraine, most of them were pro-Tymoshenko, and then western and eastern and southern Ukraine was mostly voting for Yanukovych. And I also noticed that in in Ukrainian discussion of politics, there's always mention of should we be pro-EU or pro-Russia, and I wanted to ask your opinion, do you see a future for Ukraine where the country is able to balance pressures from both sides, from both the EU and Russia, and also to balance demands from its people from both the western and eastern sides?
Maybe you take it first.
Thank
Have
you
you
so
understood
much.
the question? Yeah, of course. Maybe you want to take it and react to it. This
Right
is
now?
important enough to
Okay.
react right now.
Just briefly. I was born in the Kharkiv region. Kharkiv region is the most eastern big city of Ukraine. I don't have two parts of me. Ukraine is an integral country with variety of views, variety of attires. Speaking sometimes after hundreds of years of oppression in Russian instead of Ukrainian, but mentally we are Ukrainians. How many Chinese living here, ethnic Chinese living here, cannot speak Mandarin at all? Many, yeah. But somewhere in behind you think that originally I am from China. My grandparents are from there, or from India, or from somewhere. But this is a special feature of the country. We are one people. And of course, I favor dialogue. We don't wage war, as my Russian colleague said. We don't wage war. We defend our country. We could solve any problem by ourselves if these so-called rebels were not misled, were not funded, were not armed. If Crimea was not invaded by little green men who appeared to be Russian regular army. So thanks for your question. And I think you understand me. We are one people in our variety.
Sorry, just a clarification. I agree with your point, and I think that in sovereign affairs there is no room for foreign intervention. I was asking
Good.
about the internal political rhetoric and how, because politics has been very divided, and so I was asking what you think of current politicians, and whether you think there's room for Ukraine to cooperate with both the EU and Russia.
Can this balance be achieved, in other
We
words?
favor cooperation, and we did have this balance if you look at the trade figures. But we don't want interference in our internal affairs. As normal state, we don't like it. We don't accept it.
Okay, let's have the
Okay.
last remarks.
Sorry. My name is Olga. I used to work with both Ukrainian and Russian embassies as an interpreter, but now I would like to break the flow with non-political question because the situation is very tense, as I understood from the discussion. But my question will be more economical because I hold European passport, and yesterday I just listened to European news, which is none of the Russian or Ukrainian, and they showed the Italy where the man with the degree and all of this, he earns 10 euros an hour, and the queue to get a working space is very long, and it's in many different countries. I'm not talking about the Germany with a developed economy. My question to the Excellency is what the benefit for Ukraine is seen by Ukrainian politicians. What's the benefit is for Ukraine to join the EU? What they see for me as a
Okay, and Mr.
Thanks.
Doshi, the last question, and then Ambassador will wrap up. Oh, actually, I will wrap up at the end, but
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, may I just say that we have focused a lot on the situation in Ukraine, but we have not been able to have time to discuss the implications for Asia. What, Ambassador, are the implications in terms of food security, in terms of cyber security, and in terms of energy security? Should this situation continue unresolved in and around Ukraine?
okay, you take the last.
Oh,
Both questions.
Firstly, I tried to be very convincing. I explained you. My personal view is it is not a matter. It is not a goal to become a member of the EU. You know that some countries, like Norway, to say, enjoy very fruitful, productive cooperation with the European Union, being out of the EU. I don't mean that my voice is decisive, but there are many people in Ukraine who have diverse views. We do not associate all of us with just a single idea. This is the character of Ukrainians. We are much softer than the empire we lived in, but resilient. And whether we became EU member in some future or not, the most important is what will be really, in reality, established inside country. What kind of reforms we will manage to implement. The quality of life, relations between communities, between state and family. This is important, not EU membership.
And
The whole situation started with the argument of joining you and not you. So
Yeah,
I don't
but
understand the point.
you see, it is something. Well, you write something like liberty on the wall, yeah, just that's about. Yeah?
So
liberty.
basically, the people, they don't know for what they're fighting.
No, don't
Like if we convert this to the word, the
don't be
liberty.
kidding with us. Of course, we understand that there are values and values. There are Russian world values, which I totally reject by myself, and there are EU values or European values, which Ukraine is an integral part of, but ruined systematically for last decades. When Ukraine was a semi-colony of Moscow, to resume this European spirit, mentality, rules, this is meaningful.
Mr. Doshi's response.
Mr. Doshi, food, cyber security, energy security. Asia, it is so diverse in this region. But if you look at what is happening in Ukraine, one of the most instrumental in the hands of Moscow was energy supply. Being in that, in my headquarters, I had nothing but to systematically look through the documents when we tried to get rid of this addiction from energy supply from Russia. The line part of it came from Russia. Whatever we tried to do, we received some rather pleasant gifts with lower price on gas, or punishment the gas tap was locked, not once. Same with nuclear power. And here in Asia, believe me, I know dozens of examples when energy security and energy supply plays some controversial role in relations between countries. Very vivid example in Central Asia. There is decades-long arguments between two countries on the Amu Darya River, whether to construct them or not construct. There is another example of well, in the China, Mekong. It's hydropower, but once again, it is a kind of a very irritating instrument in the relations between countries of the region. So there is a lot of implications of energy security around the world, and now with the decreasing prices on oil, we may face a lot of consequences, inclusive in Singapore, because of some companies are dependent very much, and big companies in Singapore, dependent on the oil industry. Jobs in Singapore, income of Singaporeans are dependent on oil prices as well. And cyber. I mentioned in my speech that it was trolling which was not counted on social media as a part of new kind of war. I'm absolutely convinced cyberspace is a new battlefield of global importance. And I cannot but appreciate what government of Singapore is trying to do here to protect banking industry and kids from such interference in the private life or in the business life.
That's it.
And sorry to say, let me advertise Ukraine. This year we have huge crop of grains once again. Almost 2.5 more is collected than our own demand. So, extend these words somewhere to your business friends. Let them come and look at the agriculture potential of Ukraine. It's tremendous.
So Ambassador does some business as well. Well, thank you very much. It was a very rounded discussion in the sense that, let me just say that when we invite ambassadors to come and speak, we don't expect them to be objective, because that's not their job. They provoke. Obviously, I mean, you're not a professor. You place your points of view, then you confront contrarian views as you have today, and there is a dialectical approach that scholars watch, and then they draw their own extrapolations. I mean, no scholar will go away persuaded by one side or the other. I mean, everything will be, again, through a dialectical process, again, not to be Marxist, but to be Hegelian in some ways. You will draw your own conclusion. And that is the idea of this series, as in most universities where ambassadors go and speak, as one has gone and spoken. I want to thank you, Ambassador, for your time. I want to thank you all for your participation, by your presence, by the questions that you have asked. as to the relevance, of course, no two parts of the world, because of the world is so interrelated, is irrelevant. In your names, for instance, Sultan Danesh and Sultansky Pavlo. I mean, and then we spoke of Maidan, which is a word replicable in Hindi, Bengali, etc. And you pronounced it as Khanat, but we would call it Khanate. I mean, Ukraine was Khan's territory. I mean, Genghis Khan, etc. So it's a Khanate. Again, there are certain peculiar circumstances in all these discussions, something that we didn't talk about, because the nature of state within the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was somewhat different. Ukraine, as many of you will know, was a member of the United Nations, along with Belarusia, or today's Belarus, earlier also. So every group of nations, every Hamsaya or neighborhood has its own way of relating to other global entities. But it is our hope and aspiration that those of us who have differences with one another, somehow eventually the round table will occur. You might well say that there is no such thing as a round table, and people will behave the way they have for millennia. But at some point in time, problems come, problems are resolved, problems occur, and they're never resolved. Just because there is a problem, as I keep saying, that it does not mean there is a solution. But there are ways and ways of addressing the problem in a way that it does not produce convulsions within your own system, which may be destructive of human happiness, prosperity, and progress. With these words, I'll bring this discussion to a close. Let's give all of ourselves a good hand, and the ambassador a little token of appreciation for him to carry to his car and then home.
Thank you very much.